Retro.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continuously unexpected. So uncivilized.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And so after a 1 month plus hiatus to cover Maul Shadow Lord, we are returning to our Clone Wars rewatch with the next episode in the series, which is episode 18 from season 3, The Citadel. But before we get into that, Jay, I want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Sure thing, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So, once again, this is The Citadel, which is the 18th episode from Season 3 of the Clone Wars, and this will be a full spoiler discussion. Jay, you want to go ahead and give us the summary of the episode?
Sure thing. Jedi Master Even Piell has been captured by the Separatists and sent to the Citadel, a fortress designed to hold rogue Jedi. His rescue is imperative as he knows the coordinates for the Nexus route, which is a secret hyperspace route that infiltrates both the Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Anakin and Obi-Wan are dispatched with a squad of clones to rescue Master Piell, and Ahsoka tags along against Anakin's orders. As they infiltrate the Citadel, they discover that half the code resides with Master Piell, and the other half is known by Captain Tarkin.
Yeah, fun little reveal there at the end of that episode. So I'm going to get into your thoughts here in just a second, but what did you think about watching this after 5 weeks of watching 2 episodes of Maul and just like the level of animation that they had going on?
Well, yeah, it's just, I mean, obviously, once you make the leap directly from Maul back to Clone Wars, you notice that jump. And you're coming straight, from that totally different animation style. I wouldn't say totally different, but I mean, you just notice the faces are more angular, the lighting is a bit flatter, the movement is less nuanced. But I mean, honestly, it's like coming home, I mean, every time I come back to the Clone Wars, it's just the design work is still excellent, I mean, and it's in some of the background work, especially. I feel like it's just so detailed and so great, but yeah, there's definitely a big difference between the two and just their styles. And how did you feel about it? Same?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, the one thing that stood out to me is that the acting is consistently good. The story, I think, is next level. Again, we're talking about 8 episodes or 10 episodes compared to 1 here. So that's not fair, but just analyzing this story on its own, it wasn't to the level of what we got in Maul, but again, 10 episodes to 1. And this is the first of a 2-parter, but the acting was fantastic. Lots of great dialogue, great relationships between Obi-Wan and Anakin and Ahsoka and the clones that are there with them. And that's all fantastic. But yeah, I mean, they've had another, 15 years to do the animation for this. And so naturally they're better at it, and they've developed more tools and more assets. The Maul animation was derived from what they learned in the Clone Wars. And if you go back and you look at the Clone Wars, the animation got better every season. And then, especially when they came back to season 7 after all those years. And then it was another notch when we got to the Bad Batch, and they took it up another notch from the Bad Batch to here. So it's not a fair comparison, but it just did stand out to me. It's like, wow, this was good for its time, but how far we've come in all of this. So that was just kind of fun to watch that. We've been doing so much of the Clone Wars for so many months because that's what we had as far as anime, that's what we had that we hadn't already discussed on this show. And so yeah, you take it for granted how good it is, but then you go see Maul, and it's like, wow, okay.
Right.
And you almost take advantage, again, using that word, take for granted how great the animation was in Maul, and you really appreciate how good it was. Again, this is not bad, but it's just evolved from
Sure.
then to now. So
Mhm.
anyway,
Mhm.
that out of the way, what do you think about this story? We got a world that was initially created by the Republic and with input of the Jedi to hold Jedi that might have gone rogue or have fallen, and it's been captured by the Separatists. And now they're using it as a prison for Master Peel and other clones and Republic officers in the hopes of discovering what this route is. But what'd you think? What'd you think about this episode? What'd you think about the story?
Well, I mean, it creates tension right away because it talks about this place as where Jedi go who have lost their way. And so you think about that in the idea that, okay, well, what is meant by that exactly? Is this Jedi that, as we mentioned in the summary, that have gone rogue? Well, that means that they have had to set up this entire place, which they say is half a planet, that has to be a fortress that these force sensitive, Jedi cannot escape from. It's almost like Alcatraz in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so you feel that from the opening scene, and it's not just rescue mission of the week. You know what I mean? There's a genuine sense that the Citadel is dangerous. The stakes feel immediate right away in a way that some other episodes don't always nail. And so I appreciated that about this and the way that they went about it, in the sense that there's, like Anakin said, you either survive or you die.
Mm-hmm.
There's no in between. You're either successful or you die. And that really sets the tone for all of this. And I guess the first time or first couple times that I watched this episode, that didn't really land with me as much as it did this time for some reason.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that occurred to me while watching this is that this is I don't necessarily call it a trope, but it's a scenario that the Clone Wars really likes, where you put the characters in these environments where there is like a game master almost. And I'm thinking back to the Lair of Grievous, when it was
Mhm.
oh, Kit Fisto and his former Padawan are there with clones, and they're trying to track down Grievous. And Grievous and his little helper droid are springing traps on them, and there's a monster they spring on them. And so you get something similar here with O.C. Sobek, who is the Fendian that's running the warden of this place, and he's springing traps on them. And then later in the series, not quite the same thing, but you have when Obi-Wan disguises himself as a bounty hunter, and he's infiltrating that gang that Cad Bane has put together for this mission to kidnap the Chancellor. And so they're
Yeah,
going from
those are
room
some
to
of my
room.
favorites. Mhm.
Yeah. And so they're going from room to room with all these different traps and things that they have to overcome and stuff like that. So it's kind of a favorite thing that they do here in the Clone Wars. I'm sure I'm forgetting an example or two of this, but so that was just kind of interesting. And to your point, whose idea was this? Was this something that the Republic insisted on, or did the Jedi themselves think at some point we might have a Jedi who's lost their way and they need to be contained? If that's the case, that just does seem very un-Jedi like.
Right?
And if
Yeah.
they did do it, when did they do that? And I'm thinking, the the High Republic was not even a consideration as far as we know when this episode was created, but they did a good job in the High Republic, 200 years ago, laying out the situation that might have caused the Jedi to veer from their principles, which was, we got this threat, this very existential threat with the Nameless, and we've got the Nile and Marchion Ro that are doing all these things that now make us have to enact the Guardian protocols and do Jedi business a different way, making different lightsabers, putting Jedi in charge of Republic forces and this, that, and the other. So is it a result of that type of a decision that instead of trusting the Force and trusting the light side, that they just figured out that some people, A, may not be redeemable, or B, they could be redeemed, but we got to put them somewhere that they can't get out and do harm. That's just it's kind of a mind-blowing concept for the Jedi in this regard.
Yeah, truly. And the engineering that went into it as well, because it's obviously very Jedi proof in
Mhm.
the ways that they have all of the security set up, and the way that they have everything, with the sheer cliff faces and the different types of ray shields and,
Mustafar
all of
light.
those things. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, and you just kind of, we've got Jedi that are infiltrating it with a squad of clones, and I
Right.
could see it being very, very difficult for a single Jedi that's contained there. I mean, Evan Piell doesn't get out without any help in this situation.
Mhm.
Not to saying that he
Mhm.
couldn't if given enough time, but it does take a team to get him out of there, and we get to see a lot of traps that they have to overcome. And there's a number of clones that don't make it in this episode,
Mhm.
that get caught up in everything that happens. But before we even get to that, we've got the mission being put together, and Ahsoka was off doing something else when the briefing has happened. The mission gets assigned to Anakin and Obi-Wan, and then Ahsoka's like, it's almost like the scene out of Revenge of the Sith, where Anakin shows up late to the briefing and apologized to Obi-Wan. I got no excuse, and Owen's like, oh, in short, the procedures are going well, yada yada yada. But in this case, Ahsoka apologized for being late. What did I miss? And then Anakin is like getting ready to break the bad news that you're not going. And I loved the smirk on Obi-Wan's face at that point when he kind of looks over his shoulders, like it's like, yes, when I've had to explain something like this to you in the past, now, and you didn't like it, now you get to see what it's like to explain it to your own
Yep.
Padawan. But
Yep.
Ahsoka doesn't take no for an answer here. And what do you think about her decision to disobey the orders and go?
Well, it's very Anakin-like, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, she is his Padawan, and she's learning directly from him, and she even brings that up to Anakin later on, is that, following orders isn't always the best way to do things, or, kind of, and so Obi-Wan just smirking back there, as you said, kind of getting a taste of his own medicine. And, part of that is, the idea of what Yoda said, "We are what they grow beyond," in
Mm-hmm.
that Ahsoka is taking a lot of these lessons from Anakin to do critical thinking, to go off on your own and take risks and that type of thing. But then at the same time, she is still a Padawan, so she needs to respect her master just the same way that Anakin should have respected Obi-Wan, but I guess that didn't always happen either. So, was Ahsoka right to just go off and do this? She does end up becoming an asset on the team, obviously, with her ability to get into the vents. But in other ways, it's kind of belligerent on her part that she's not following these orders, and this isn't the first time that she's done this either.
Yeah, and we have to resist. I think in analyzing the decision, we have to resist assessing whether the decision was correct based on the outcome. And because we do know that she shows up
Sure.
and she's helpful, and
Mhm.
that if she wasn't there, things may have turned out for the worse in some situations. But what's the motivation for her going? Did she really feel like she was an essential part of this mission? Or was she going because she thought like she had something to prove?
Mhm. She didn't wanna be
Which
left out.
she didn't want to be left out. She felt like perhaps her abilities were being diminished. And that's not really a good reason for making that decision.
Sure. Mhm. I agree.
Yeah. But
100%.
yeah, that's a conversation for her and Anakin to have at another moment, I suppose. But
Right.
they've got to get past the defenses, the outer system defenses, to get to this planet. And the trick to that is that the prison is going to be scanning incoming ships for life forms. So they've got some old battle droids that R2D2 is going to be put in command of, and then everybody else is getting frozen in carbonite to disguise their life forms so they can make it to this planet, which is called Lola Sayu, where the Citadel is located. They talk a bit about this in the episode guide, in the featurette there. And Dave Filoni was conscious of, it was this big deal when they did Empire Strikes Back. So trying to figure out, I don't know that he was so concerned about that, that was like about that being like the first time it ever happened, but he does make the point that Darth Vader knew about this experience. And the real question is whether the facility that they were using was going to be up to the task of freezing Han Solo without killing him there. But as cool as it is to have that callback to The Empire Strikes Back, do you feel like it in any way diminishes what Han went through, or what's your thought on that?
Well, I think no, it doesn't diminish it, but I think what it does help to do is to explain how carbonite is actually used throughout the galaxy. It was obviously a legitimate industrial transport method for, some things. And then obviously we've seen it since then too, because the Mandalorian used it,
Mm-hmm.
even just on the Razor Crest. So, I mean, it's the idea of it has kind of evolved since then because I think it was the first time that we ever saw it done to Han in, The Empire Strikes Back. That gives it that shock factor, that wow factor, and also the fact that he was in that for quite a long time. I mean, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how long the bounties that the Mandalorian had on the Razor Crest were in carbonite freeze, but this is obviously a very temporary sort of thing, but still kind of scary to think about, having to go through this and then knowing that, there's a possibility that you could have claustrophobia. You don't know, like, they trusted the process. I don't know. For me, though, that would be a little crazy. But I did think about the idea that Han had carbonite sickness and he had the blindness,
Mm-hmm.
but that must have been because he was in it for so long, as
Oh
opposed to
yeah,
it's
I mean,
very temporary.
sure, and we can make all kinds of justifications for that don't stretch credulity at all. I mean, like you said, he was in there for a very long time, and so he would, have carbonite sickness. And look, that's even something that Leia knew about and said, you're suffering from carbonite sickness, your eyesight will return in time, which
Hmm.
suggests that this is something that they're aware of. But the thing is like, and I get what you're saying with like, yeah, we've now seen it The Mandalorian, which kind of also diminishes it. But just going back to when this debuted, the only other instance in canon Star Wars storytelling that we were worrying about, back then it was the expanded universe. We had G level canon and all that stuff that could drive you up the wall, trying to figure out what counts on what level. But
Right.
the point being is that when it happened to Han, it was a horrific thing. He's
Hmm.
frozen there with his hands up his mouth, like open in tear. Like this was not a pleasant experience. Obi-Wan does it, and he's got his hands serenely folded in front of him, right?
Hmm.
In
Hmm.
this scene here. So I'm not certain that I'm so worried about it being like the first time it ever happened. It had to be the first time The Empire Strikes Back. It's just like it was almost treated like as this casual thing in here.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, it's
No, I
not,
see your point. Yeah.
yeah, Ahsoka's coming out at coughing, and then Anakin's like, "Oh, hey, Snips," before he comes to us like Snips, and
Right.
Owen's like, "Do my eyes deceive me, or is that your Padawan?" Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't want to make a big deal out of it because it is what it is, and it's fine. But and George Lucas would tell me, "Quit being a wimp," when it comes down. This continuity is for wimps would be his response to that. But I would be lying if I said that I didn't stop and pause for that. It's like, really, they just did that. Okay, so
Mhm,
yeah.
mhm. No, I totally get it. And I
Yeah.
I have to ask though too, stepping back for just a second, Ahsoka talks to Plo Koon after Anakin tells her, "No, you're not coming. This is not for
Mhm.
you." Yada yada yada. And then that's the first thing that Ahsoka says when she comes to and they realize, Anakin realizes that she's there and she shouldn't be there. And she says that Plo Koon, Master Koon, basically gave her permission to do so and
Well,
ordered her to be there.
did she name him specifically, or just say the mission got changed and you found out late, and that you guys had already been frozen at that point? It
Maybe
doesn't.
she doesn't mention him, but
I
you
don't
make
think
that
she.
leap. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, that's a lie. I mean,
Mhm.
if she had been honest and said that, I talked to Plo Koon and he encouraged me to follow my gut, that would have been the truth. But she's saying that the Jedi Order changed their minds and assigned her this mission. That's not what happened
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
And that kind of gets back to the question I was asking earlier about this. Yeah, her master, Anakin, has set this example, which is you don't necessarily, about not always following orders. but I don't remember him ever really lying about it like that.
No, that's a good point.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about a lot of things, but let's talk about the Citadel here. And I guess we kind of talked about it a bit, but yeah, definitely a nasty place. I mean, you've got the mines on the cliff face that they get all the way up until someone slips the last second, which is just the
Oh,
luck, and they get discovered in that regard. And then you, of course, they get in there and they've got electricity cycling through the walls. There is the magnetism on the ceiling in one place when all their weapons and Anakin's arm gets pulled up to it there. Did you find any one of these particularly deviously disturbing, or, which one of the traps seemed the most lethal to you?
well, again, it goes back to the idea that these Jedi that were basically imprisoned here, they came up with all of the types of traps and, gimmicks that could potentially harm them, I guess, for
Mm-hmm.
lack of a better word. And that's pretty scary in a lot of ways. And I think the magnetized thing was a little bit disturbing just because the fact that, again, with Anakin's mechanical arm, for him, that was a lot more personal than just the weapons. And
Mm-hmm.
then the electrocution on top of that was also, not very nice, for lack of a better explanation. I mean, everything along the way is just another little torture device in some ways. And you feel so bad for the clones that ended up perishing because there was no fanfare. There wasn't even like a musical cue that was, kind of an alarming sort of thing. It was like, well, there they go. And just like Obi-Wan even said, well, I guess we're going to be, I can't remember his exact words, but like we're one shy now or something like that. And it was
Mm-hmm.
very, I don't know, very
Yeah.
impersonal in a lot of ways.
Well, I talked a little bit about like the game master type thing. But so you had Osi Sobek, who was just like he saw this as like an affront that the Jedi would show up there, and he delighted in trying to kill them all with his
Oh,
various
yeah.
traps on there. So, and he was voiced by James Arnold Taylor, which is pretty cool. And then Ashley Eckstein got to do the voice of the tactical droid. That was also fun to see her get that chance. So like
Yes.
everyone in
Awesome.
the main cast gets to voice a tactical droid at some point, and this was her
Mhm.
turn. But they get through a number of these traps, and then we get the reveal of Captain Tarkin here. Of course, famously known as being Grand Moff Tarkin. But even then, it's just this. Before he was the Grand Moff, before Anakin was Darth Vader, it's like their first interaction with each other here, and they don't particularly like each other. It's I can't remember what
No.
the exact exchange is, and I think it was something along the lines of Anakin talking about, reserving, trusting those that can like look for themselves or fight for themselves, something along those lines. But then it is, and then it is Tarkin who says like, "I reserve my trust for those who take action." General Skywalker there, so they're kind of at odds now. I don't know, do you feel like this informs the relationship at all later, or is it just change once they're kind of both like the right hand men to Palpatine at a later stage?
Well, I think about the exchange that they even have on the Death Star where Tarkin is talking to Vader almost as an underling. He talks
Hmm.
talks to him about your religion, this ancient religion of yours, yada yada yada. So you can tell that there's always been a strain in the relationship, and it definitely starts from moment one right here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that we all know what Anakin's sins are going to ultimately be that lead him to becoming Darth Vader, but we like him here in the Clone Wars, right? And he's our
Mhm.
hero.
Sure.
And it's one of the great successes of this show that it even makes us lament his fall to the dark side even more. We know it's coming. I mean, Revenge of the Sith came first before we saw this. And
Yes.
Return of the Jedi before that, when we knew for certain that Vader was Anakin Skywalker and Luke's father and Leia's father and all like that. But gosh darn it, if it wasn't the Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and now this series that just fleshed him out, made him so human, and now you're pairing him up against Tarkin, who really has disdain for just about anybody. It's not him. I mean, when it comes down to it,
True.
he doesn't
Yeah.
particularly like the clones. He doesn't think that much he doesn't think highly of the Jedi. We've had the blessing of had all the backstory. He's from Iriadu, and he's had an opportunity to the Carrion Spike and all that stuff, and we know the type of place he comes from and what it is that he respects. And then we got that great comic that was written where Vader asked him to hunt him, and so we kind of see what comes all of this. But in this moment, just him being there and talking the way he does, it's like, yeah, don't like this guy. He's just not likable. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a very interesting choice of how to introduce these characters to each other as well under these circumstances.
Yeah. Well, that kind of gets us to this episode. They're still trapped at the Citadel by the end of the episode, and they're going to have to get a way off. And so we'll get to that conclusion next week. But before we wrap things up, did you have anything else you want to say about this?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Evan Piell, and because we didn't really get a whole lot of him up until this point. We had some cameos, obviously, in The Phantom Menace, but then it made me think about the book that we read, The Living Force, where Evan Piell ends up working with those delinquents, the juvenile delinquents that lost their way.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
he still had that sense of gruff humor. And even Anakin points that out in this episode. He's like, well, at least you haven't lost your sense of humor. So I just really appreciated the fact that I was able to tie this episode to a future work that we have since gotten because of this. And just the idea that this whole mission is based upon rescuing a Jedi from a situation that other Jedi have been put in purposely, kind of thing. And the idea that this Nexus route is something that is so important that they had to split the information between two people. It's almost like, there's only ever two people on the face of the earth that know the formula to KFC kind of thing, and they can't both be on the same plane at the same time. Isn't that the truth? So that was kind of a fun little twist as well. And so why, out of the entire Jedi Order, was there just the one Jedi that was given that information? And interesting that it was Evan Piell.
I think it was because he discovered it and was bringing it back. Wasn't it? I'm not sure it was something that the Jedi I think it was like this legendary Northwest Passage that, and they discovered it. And so now it's because, frankly, if the Republic knew it, they would have used it to defeat the Separatists already.
True.
But they don't. And now we're going to lose. Well, that gets into the next episode. So we'll save that discussion for next week. But no, I'm glad you brought up that book by John Jackson Miller, and that, and especially because the audio delivery of that, and when Mark Thompson gets to do his voice, is lots of fun. He does something very similar to what we hear, and it was such a great personality, because you're right, because we only do see him in the background in The Phantom Menace, and I think he might show up in a place or two in the background in the Clone Wars, but this is where we really get to know him here. And it also kind of delivers on what the promises the Clone Wars was supposed to be, which is a tale of the Jedi between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. In the first season, we got that. We got Aayla Secura, we got Luminara, we got all these other Jedi, and then they really just ended up relying on our big three for the most part after that. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, and then we would have episodes about Padme. But this is, again, one of those where we got to see another Jedi. And so he wasn't necessarily the star, but it was another Jedi that we didn't really get to spend time with. So,
yes, so true.
All right. Okay, well, cool. Well, I'm looking forward to discussing part 2 of this story next week. So with that in mind, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our ongoing series covering our Clone Wars rewatch. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to catch more discussion of the Clone Wars here on Podcast Stardust, make sure you've hit that subscribe button on your podcatcher of choice. We also appreciate your ratings and reviews. And then if you're looking for more Podcast Stardust beyond the 100 or 200 episodes you're likely to have on your podcatcher, head over to retrozap.com and you can get the entire back catalog. All previous 1,034 episodes are over there, as well as all the other great shows that are currently on the network. Jay, you want to remind everybody where else we can be found online and what those social media contacts are one more time?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned at the start of the episode, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And in addition to that, you can always check out our Pinterest boards and our 2 YouTube outlets. So, we have the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. So, head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And if you'd like to drop us a line, you can do so at our email, which is podcaststardust@gmail.com. And then if you'd like to pick up some Podcast Stardust swag, we have a store over on TeePublic, and there's all kinds of show logos to pick from. And if you are interested in doing that, you just click on the link in our show notes, and it'll take you right to where you need to go.
All right. You want to give everyone an update on what's going on with cosplay?
Sure. So always over on my Instagram is j.stipscosplay, and you can catch me as Ahsoka from the Clone Wars, as well as the Fourth Sister Inquisitor, my 2 different versions of Hera, my original concept Mandalorian based on Tahiri Vela from Legends, and a few other fun things as well, and some non-Star Wars things as well. So once again, come check it out at j.snipscosplay.
All right, upcoming on the show on Wednesday, it is the next installment in our The Force Awakens series. That'll be part 5. We got a great guest. Make sure you check it out. And then on Friday, we are ending the week with a look at recent Star Wars news. So we hope to see you then. But until then, thanks for listening to episode 1035 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.